I didn't even realize I was crying until someone handed me a tissue, half-heartedly, like they were more annoyed than concerned. I was seated in the break room, shoulders curled inward, doing everything I could to keep the sobs silent. I had stepped outside the conference room after the third email from HR. I thought I could breathe for 5 minutes, just 5. But grief doesn't wait for permission. And on that cold Wednesday morning, it cracked open inside me without warning. Behind me, I heard whispers, 2 co-workers by the coffee machine. She's always so sensitive. Honestly, this place isn't a daycare. I wiped my face quickly, trying to pull myself together. When I stood up to leave, my manager was already there, clipboard in hand, neutral face. "We'll need to talk," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "Please collect your things." My heart dropped. I wasn't even on the floor for 10 minutes. "This isn't the first time you've had emotional disruptions," she said, "and it's affecting productivity." That was the word they always used, disruption, as if pain were a scheduling error. I stood there, blinking too fast, trying to make sense of how compassion had become a liability. Just then the door opened. There was a pause, a shift in air, and then a voice I hadn't heard in days. Deep, familiar, unmistakable. "Why?" the CEO asked, stepping into the room. "Is my wife upset?" Everything stopped. Someone gasped. My manager's face turned to stone. And I forgot how to breathe. For a second, no one moved. His voice hadn't been raised, but it didn't need to be. Authority clung to it, calm and lethal. The manager blinked, her mouth twitching as she processed what had just been said. I stood frozen, mascara smudged, heart pounding in my throat. Wife. He had said it like it was fact, like it wasn't the best-kept secret of the last year. The CEO and I had married quietly during the pandemic. 2 people with scars they didn't want the world to examine. We promised each other time, space, and privacy, especially at work, especially here. He crossed the room, his steps slow, measured. "Did I miss something?" he asked, his eyes flicking to my manager. She cleared her throat. "Sir, I wasn't aware. No, I don't think you were." His tone didn't rise, but the reprimand was clear. "You called my wife a disruption." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He turned to me next, not as a CEO, but as the man who knew how I carried grief in silence for weeks, who had watched me retreat after I lost my sister, who had given me space but always checked in. Now he was standing in front of me, asking with his eyes if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. He looked back at my manager and said with finality, "She's not going anywhere. But you and I will be having a meeting after this." My manager's face drained of color. The break room was dead silent, and for the first time that week, I felt like I could breathe again, barely. He didn't touch me. Not there. Not in front of them. But the way he stood beside me, just close enough, just still enough, was louder than any embrace. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of visibility. What we'd hidden for months now sat in the center of a room full of people who hadn't even known my name yesterday. I had been the quiet one, the sensitive one, the girl who cried at her desk and kept her lunch breaks short. Now I was something else entirely, his wife. And though the title didn't feel new to me, it felt foreign on their tongues. As he turned and walked out, he glanced back once, his eyes softer now, as if to say, "You're not alone in this anymore." I followed, not because I needed saving, but because I needed air. Real air. Outside, the lobby buzzed with movement. Phones rang. Heels clicked. But everywhere we passed, people fell silent. Some whispered. Some stared. And still, he didn't let it shake him. He simply walked beside me, like this was any other day. We reached the elevator, and as the doors closed, it was just us, for the first time in weeks. I looked up at him, unsure of what to say, of what I was allowed to say now. He spoke first. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." My throat tightened. I wanted to say it was okay, that I understood, but all I managed was a nod. because in that moment, words weren't needed. Only truth. And finally, it had found its way into the light. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, his floor, and everything inside me braced. We hadn't been here together since before things got complicated. Before I started hiding how often I cried in the bathroom. Before he stopped asking if I needed him to walk me home. His office hadn't changed. Still the same spotless shelves, the faint scent of bergamot tea, the view that made everything outside look manageable. But now, everything between us felt different. He closed the door softly behind us, but I stayed near the window. "You didn't have to do that," I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant. "I didn't do it for them," he replied. I looked at him, really looked. He looked tired, not in the way late nights make you tired, but in the way guilt does when it sits too long on the chest. "I told you I could keep our world separate," I said. "I told you I could handle it." He stepped closer, carefully, like he wasn't sure if I'd let him. "And I believed you. I just forgot how cruel this place can be when it decides someone feels too much." I felt a lump rise in my throat again, not from sadness, this time from anger. At them, at him, at myself. "They made me feel like I was broken," I whispered, "and I let them." He shook his head, voice steady. "You weren't broken. You were grieving, and they punished you for being human." I looked away, tears pressing against my lashes again, but this time I didn't hide them. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just far enough that I could choose, move closer or keep the distance. "I saw the messages," he said quietly. "HR, the flags, the comments from your manager." His voice didn't rise, but something in it cracked. "Why didn't you tell me it had gotten that bad?" I swallowed hard, my eyes still fixed on the city beyond the glass. "Because I didn't want to be the reason you had to choose." He flinched at that, just slightly, but I caught it. "Everyone already thinks I'm weak," I continued. "Imagine what they'd say if they knew I was crying and your wife." The word still felt dangerous in my mouth. Fragile. Loaded. "Let them talk," he said. "They talk anyway." "You've worked your whole life to be seen a certain way," I said. "You built something clean, controlled. I didn't want to be the thing that made it messy." Silence stretched between us like a rope pulled tight. Then his voice, lower now. "You never made anything messy. They did that. You just made it honest." My eyes filled again, but I didn't look away this time, because I wanted him to see it. The cost of holding everything in. The exhaustion of trying to be perfect while bleeding quietly on the inside. "I didn't marry you because you're strong all the time," he said. "I married you because you let me love you when you're not." And in that moment, part of me broke. Only so something softer could begin. We sat on the couch in his office, side by side, the city lights casting soft reflections across the glass wall. No one knocked. No one dared. In that space, the chaos faded. There was no CEO, no employee, no scandal waiting to surface. Just him, just me, and all the things we hadn't said for weeks. I leaned my head on his shoulder, slowly, and he let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. His hand found mine without hesitation, like it had been waiting. "Do you regret it?" I asked softly, unsure which part one meant. Us, the secrecy, the exposure. He didn't ask me to clarify. "No," he said, "but I regret letting you carry it alone." That was the thing about him. He didn't try to erase the pain. He named it, sat with it, made it something we could hold together instead of bury. I closed my eyes, resting in the silence that followed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. There were still meetings waiting, rumors brewing, 1,000 implications we hadn't untangled. But for now, I wasn't alone. And sometimes that's all the healing you can ask for, to be allowed to fall apart without being left behind. "Tomorrow will be hard," I murmured. "It will," he said, "but we'll face it." The word we landed soft, but certain, like a lifeline. I didn't know what came next, but in that quiet, tethered moment, I believed him. And that belief, fragile as it was, felt like the first step back to myself. The next morning, I walked into the office not as a secret, but as a storm everyone had tried to ignore until it cracked open. The silence hit first. People who had smiled politely before now avoided my eyes. Some out of guilt, some out of fear, some because they didn't know how to look at me without questioning everything they thought they understood. I didn't rush to my desk. I didn't shrink into corners. I walked like I had the right to be there because for the first time I believed I did. The whispers followed, soft and cowardly. She's the CEO's wife. He defended her, publicly. She cried and still kept her job? But none of them said it to my face, and that, somehow, gave me more strength than silence ever had. I sat down, turned on my screen, and breathed. Slowly, fully, not because the fear was gone, but because it no longer owned me. He didn't stop by. He didn't message. But a single cup of chamomile tea had been left at my desk. No note, just a cup, just enough. I took a sip, letting the warmth settle the tremor I hadn't even noticed in my hands. I wasn't naive. I knew what the looks meant. I knew the political undercurrent this would stir. But I also knew who I was now. I wasn't just the woman who had cried. I was the woman who had been seen crying, and was still standing. And that changed everything. By midday, I was summoned to a culture check-in with HR. The irony didn't escape me. Same room, same sterile chairs. But the tone was different now, measured, almost overly careful. We just want to make sure you feel supported, one of them said, folding her hands like a school principal pretending to care. I met her gaze steady. Do you mean before or after I was told my emotions were disruptive? She flinched just slightly. There's been some miscommunication, she offered. We value all employees. That's interesting, I replied, because I felt disposable until my last name became relevant. The second HR rep shifted in his seat. It's important to keep professional boundaries in place, he added quickly, especially now that your relationship status is known. And there it was, the threat disguised as structure. I smiled, not kindly. I was asked to leave because I cried, I said calmly. If we're going to talk about boundaries, let's start there. The conversation didn't last much longer. There were vague promises of review, of policy alignment, of open channels of communication. But I knew better. This wasn't about healing. This was about control. When I returned to my desk, I found a sticky note on my monitor. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "You didn't do anything wrong." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me still needed to. I folded it into my notebook, quiet proof that even in a place built on image, someone saw the truth. That night, I walked home alone. No driver, no umbrella, just the city pressing in around me, soft and silver under a light drizzle. It felt right somehow to walk without shields, to let the rain touch my skin and not apologize for being open. Vulnerability no longer felt like a crack. It felt like breath. When I reached my apartment, I changed out of my work clothes and stood barefoot in the kitchen, letting the quiet settle. I brewed tea, not the kind he left on my desk, but my mother's kind, strong, earthy, the one she made after long days when words weren't enough. I wrapped my hands around the mug and stared out the window, thinking about everything I had tried to hide just to survive a place that asked me to be invisible. And how now? I couldn't go back to that version of me. I wouldn't. My phone buzzed once, his name on the screen. I hesitated before answering. You okay? He asked softly. Not really, I admitted, but I'm not broken either. There was a long pause. I miss you, he said. I closed my eyes, let the words land where they needed to. We were never really apart, I replied. He didn't speak after that, but I didn't hang up either. We just breathed together, one in a corner office, one in a tiny kitchen, stitched together by something that wasn't performance or power, but presence. And as the rain tapped softly against the window, I realized, Maybe I didn't need to prove I was strong. Maybe surviving this without disappearing was already enough. A few days later, he asked to meet. Not at the office, not at home, but at a quiet rooftop cafe tucked behind a flower shop. Our unofficial space, long before anything between us had a name. The air was brisk, the kind that makes you breathe a little deeper. I found him already there, 2 mugs of tea waiting on the small metal table, his coat draped over the back of the chair across from him. He looked up as I approached, not with tension, not with guilt. Just hope. I didn't want to pull you back into anything, he said as I Saturday. I just wanted to share the quiet again. I nodded, grateful for the honesty. No demands, no apologies wrapped in control, just the space to sit without armor. We talked slowly, the way people do when they've already said the hard things and what's left is just the truth. About the fallout, the HR meeting, the silence that followed. They won't stop watching, I said. They'll keep waiting for me to make the wrong move. He stirred his tea. Then let them watch you rise instead. His words didn't promise protection. They didn't offer a shield. They offered witness. And sometimes that's what love looks like, not rescue, but remaining. A soft endurance. A steady choice. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth ease what still ached. I'm not fragile, I said, more to myself than to him. He didn't argue. He just nodded. No, you're fire. You just forgot you could burn. And that was the moment I knew. He still saw me. The real me. We sat there for nearly an hour, letting the world move around us without rushing to catch up. It was strange, how something so exposed could still feel private. There were no declarations, no ultimatums, just a quiet sense that we were both holding something that hadn't shattered, despite the pressure. I've been thinking, he said finally, fingers wrapped around his cup, about how much of us has been lived in the gaps, between meetings, behind closed doors, after everyone's gone home. I didn't answer, because he was right. So much of what we had shared was borrowed time, hidden in quiet hours no one tracked. We built something real in the margins, he said, but maybe it's time we ask if it deserves the center. My heart ached, not from fear, but from the impossible weight of truth. They won't forgive you, I whispered. Not the board, not the press, not your investors. He nodded. They don't have to. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about whether I'm proud of the man I am when I'm with you. I looked at him then, the man I'd married in a courthouse with trembling hands and promises we didn't know how to keep. The same man who now sat across from me with a question in his eyes. Do we keep hiding, or do we begin again in the open? I didn't have an answer yet, but I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. And in that stillness, I knew the question was real. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to ask it too. We didn't leave with a plan. We didn't need one. Some stories don't demand architecture. They ask for breath, for presence, for the willingness to stay in the room when things get uncertain. As we walked down the narrow stairs of the cafe, he reached for my hand. Not tightly, not possessively, just enough to remind me we were still tethered. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through the trees, soft and golden. We paused in front of the flower shop. Pick one, he said. I hesitated, then chose a single white camellia. My mother once told me they symbolized waiting and dignity. I handed it to him, and he tucked it gently into his coat pocket, saying nothing. He didn't offer to drive me home. I didn't ask. We both understood the beauty of walking separate paths without letting go. As I turned to leave, he said one final thing. Not grand, not dramatic. Just true. Whatever comes next, don't let them teach you to be smaller than you are. I looked back once, then nodded. I didn't promise anything, but I meant everything. That night, I pinned a note to my mirror, right above the reflection of my tired eyes. It said, Your grief was never too much. It was just too honest for the wrong room. And for the first time since that awful morning in the break room, I saw myself not as the woman who broke down, but as the one who survived the fall, stood back up and kept going with her voice intact. Weeks passed. The gossip slowed, the whispers dulled. A new intern spilled coffee on an executive's laptop, and suddenly I wasn't the headline anymore. That's how corporate memory works. It shortens when it's convenient. But I remembered. I remembered everything. And instead of burying it, I let it live. Quietly, gracefully. I started leaving the office on time. I stopped shrinking into myself during meetings. I raised my hand when I had something to say, and didn't apologize if my voice trembled a little. There were days I still cried, but not in the bathroom stall. Sometimes at my desk. Sometimes at lunch. Once, even in the elevator. But no one dared to call it a disruption again, because now people saw the whole of me, not just the cracks. One afternoon, my former manager, was moved to another department. No announcement, just a calendar update. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply sat a little straighter. The CEO and I didn't flaunt anything. We didn't need to. Our story wasn't a spectacle. It was survival. Sometimes we had lunch together on the rooftop. Sometimes just tea after hours. No words, just company. We didn't fix what had happened. We didn't erase the weight of how it hurt. But we honored it. That was enough. In the stillness of routine, I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. Healing doesn't always look like standing tall with dry eyes. Sometimes it's showing up with your heart still bruised and saying, I'm here anyway. And that counts too. He never pushed for more. Not once. He knew the cost of exposure, and he respected the silence I needed to rebuild myself. We existed gently now, in shared glances during meetings, in the soft clink of mugs on the rooftop, in the way he waited for everyone to leave before entering the elevator I was in. There was something sacred about that quiet, something deeper than declarations. One evening, as the sky folded into dusk, we sat watching the city lights flicker on like stars below. I rested my chin on my knees, wrapped in a coat too big for me, and whispered, Do you ever wish we had done it differently? He didn't answer right away, just reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. No, he said finally. I just wish I'd made space for you sooner. I smiled, small, real. You didn't make space. I took it. That made him laugh. Soft, surprised. You're right, he said. And I'm glad you did. He pulled something from his coat pocket then. Not a ring. Not a letter. Just the same folded note I had once left on his desk weeks ago. You didn't do anything wrong. He had kept it, carried it, and somehow that mattered more than anything grand. Because in a world of people trained to forget what's inconvenient, he chose to remember. And that choice, over and over, became the quiet foundation we stood on. Not flashy, not perfect, but true. And maybe for two people like us, truth was the only forever we ever needed. I never returned to who I was before that morning in the break room. That version of me, the one who apologized for tears, who tried to disappear in meetings, who whispered instead of speaking. She didn't survive. And I'm glad, because in her place, someone else was born. Not louder, not colder, just steadier. Someone who knew her value even when others didn't. Someone who cried and didn't hide. Who stood in rooms not because she was allowed in, but because she chose not to leave. I kept the ribbon from that rooftop cafe. I tied it around the handle of my favorite mug, navy blue ceramic, slightly chipped, just like me. Every morning, I brewed the same tea and reminded myself, you are still here. Not despite the mess, but because of it. He and I never announced anything. We didn't need to. Those who knew, knew. Those who didn't matter. Our love was no longer something fragile, hidden in shadows. It was quiet and rooted. A hand reached across the table. A glance in a meeting. The way he waited always until I was ready. And I was, finally, not for them, not even for him, but for me. Because the woman I'd become was someone I never thought I'd meet. Braver, softer, real. And that woman deserved a story she could walk through without apology. So I kept going. And when I passed the break room months later, I didn't flinch. I smiled, because that's where everything ended, and where something far more honest began.